moments ago. Watch this. This is the side of the building just collapsing. There you see. There you see. Now, whether that is the result of just further weakening of the structure of the building, or whether that's yet another terrorist attack, I don't know. I would imagine the former, that the building structure just weakens to the point where the wall, no longer able to sustain the weight, just caved. But that was the.
It feels really empty. It feels, excuse me, but dead.
He took a CNN handheld camera inside the wreckage.
When I was looking through the big crater, I started realizing that there's just probably dead bodies among all the debris, and it got to me.
Jonathan isn't sure exactly where he was shooting or where he was even working. It's too confusing, and instructions to volunteers, he says, are scarce.
Everyone's doing the same thing.
Cool.
Police, rescuers, fire, us, any volunteers from whatever organizations. They're walking through there looking for people, digging things up.
There was one picture he wished he could have shown us, but it never happened.
I wish I could have caught a rescue or someone coming out alive. It is what it is.
Spoke with bin Laden, said the accused terrorist denied any part in the attacks, but told him,
for me, I was happy when it happened to Americans, because they have killed us in Palestine, they have killed us in Lebanon, they have killed us all over the world. Now it is their time to be punished.
Bin Laden is believed to be hiding in Afghanistan. The ruling Taliban there says talk of moving Osama bin Laden out to the west is far too premature. The Taliban say they want hard evidence that he has done anything wrong. The movement's foreign minister told a Kabul press conference that it's a bit like rounding up the usual suspects, that bin Laden's name is in the media now just because his name has been in the media in the past. Another Arab journalist who has interviewed bin Laden says getting the wanted man won't necessarily end the problem.
Even if the American killed un avión de estas características de 180 toneladas a esa velocidad y baja cota es francamente difícil de maniobrar o complicado de maniobrar en manual y acertar exactamente con una de las estructuras a las cuales se quiere golpear. Ya se ve que se mueve en algunos sentidos para poder acertarle finalmente. Está dirigido hacia el impacto final que sucede pues prácticamente en este momento.
Completely in one.
Grandes en los equipajes estos de mano que llevamos últimamente, que se pueden mimetizar con cintas metálicas, manipulándolos indudablemente. Después también tenemos magnífica. Indudablemente la seguridad tampoco es perfecta, tiene coladeros, tiene agujeros en algún sitio. El equipaje que es chequeado sistemáticamente es el de la tripulación, técnica y auxiliar, antes de llegar al avión. Pero los pasajeros, como ustedes saben porque han volado muchas veces, pues el equipaje de mano se chequea por las cintas, pero el equipaje...
Smoke and dust drifting from lower Manhattan across Brooklyn is clearly visible from 250 miles up in pictures taken by the crew of the International Space Station.
From the observation decks on the top floors, tourists from around the world got their most memorable views of New York. When the World Trade Center was built in the 1960s, its soaring steel columns made it like nothing constructed before. Huge prefabricated sections were hoisted into position as the towers grew higher at an impressive pace. In retrospect, would it have been different had there been more supporting beams in a greater area around this building?
Well, frankly, it's hard to imagine a building having more steel than this structure.
The innovative design was like a square donut. The strength was in the steel columns of the outer walls and the steel of the central core. At the beginning, the towers seemed incredibly stable, each apparently absorbing the impact of a Boeing 767 traveling at close to 500 miles an hour. The explosion of jet fuel that followed was the equivalent of a massive bomb, says physics professor Stephen Block.
The energy in a fully laden 767 is nearly equal to a kiloton of TNT being exploded. This is a staggering amount of energy, and it's equivalent, roughly speaking, to about a 20th of the energy that was deposited in the bomb that leveled Hiroshima.
But still, the towers stood. The blazing jet fuel, however, created fires burning hot enough to weaken the steel that held the World Trade Center high. Wasn't the shaking, it was fire.
It was definitely the fire that took the building down.
As the fire burned on, experts say, temperatures rose above 1,000 degrees to the point where steel loses its strength.
Once it began to fail, it dragged in the floors and proceeded to pancake floor by floor so that the entire building collapsed, which was not necessary.
Architect Jim Malott says new standards for fireproofing and structural support may grow from this tragedy.
When you build something this big, it better not fail.
Engineers and architects say it's likely to be a long time before any more 100-story high-rises are built. In fact, across the country, almost every high-rise building seems suddenly more fragile and vulnerable. John Blackstone, CBS News, San Francisco.
An observation.
Island are now the waters that connect it with help from across the country.
How many trips are you going to be making back and forth today?
As many as we need to.
All night long?
As many as we need to.
So with the city streets clogged and blocked by debris, the fastest way for rescuers to get to the scene is sometimes by boat. Within hours, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world had suddenly become a lifeline, with every type of boat imaginable making the crossing from New Jersey to Manhattan. On board, water, clothes, food, medicine, all accompanied by a healthy dose of fear.
I have no idea what to expect right now.
For Joe Iacovoni, it was a matter of pitching in. For the Coast Guard, it was a matter of duty.
So how many trips have you guys made?
Numerous, uncountable, sir. It's been nonstop.
In the moments after the attack, the Coast Guard took control of the harbor, clearing the way for a steady stream of boats, filled with willing hearts, now able to lend a hand. Zelda Schuster is a registered nurse, volunteering to head back into a place she knows well.
I took care of the men that died while those buildings were going up. I'm just outraged. I'm absolutely outraged.
Outrage that turned to an outpouring of kindness. The Coast Guard has been working.
Pearl Harbor became the uncontested model for a U.S. government, tragically asleep at the switch. Now, as the smoke settles over a new day of infamy, questions are hardening over why officials failed to detect any aspect of what was obviously a carefully planned attack. The total U.S. intelligence budget is classified, but it's generally believed to exceed $30 billion. Much of that goes to high-tech surveillance equipment like satellites for taking photographs and detecting missile launches, and radio interception equipment that enables U.S. experts to listen in on foreign communications. This technical spying, experts say, works when the target is a country like the old Soviet Union or China, but is less effective at penetrating terrorist groups.
Human intelligence, spies.
As we got to I call it the sound of destruction, because that's all you could really think that it was. And you just heard this massive sound. What I later learned was the plane crashing into the building and debris falling and people screaming.
The various agencies that are trying to help out, even just taking the time away from the television to get to our families and take care of them.
All right, finally, Dr. Silver, just a few seconds left. How do you think it would be better to go on? Mayor Giuliani is talking about rebuilding, not putting a memorial on the scene of where these towers were. Yet we looked at Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma City bombing survivors. They put up a memorial. Which way do you feel is better?
I think memorials can be quite useful. They're a good focal point for grief and dealing with things such as the memorial in D.C. that is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. But I think it has to be in the context of reminding people that this is not all there is. We still have our friends, our families, and each other. We still have...
Right now in Washington, I can tell you...
Just 2 days ago, 42-year-old Phil Bachman won.
In July, we moved up to the 81st floor, where helicopters would actually ride underneath us.
They both came to work early this past Tuesday, where it was business as usual.
It's early this Tuesday morning, the 11th of September, 2001.
But not for long.
8:50 or so, I heard a boom.
Together, Tom Kaminsky, Chopper 880.
All right, Pat, we are just currently getting a look at the World Trade Center. We have...
So when it hit, first thing I did was, I got knocked down.
Anthony jumped back up and looked out the window. What he saw horrified him.
Some people, debris falling, a lot of ashes, a lot of fire, a lot of smoke. That was so scary. That's when I started, panicking.
Everyone on the 81st floor ran for the emergency exit and started down the stairs. At first, they made steady progress.
We're on the 50th floor, the 40th floor, the 30th floor. But as we're going down, we're seeing firemen resting. The sweat is dripping off their face, and they're carrying oxygen tanks. And you start to think, are you going to make it?
Just a few blocks north, Phil's girlfriend, Helen Orloff, was at work, watching TV and wondering the same thing.
I became hysterical, and I tried to call him, and I couldn't get him, obviously. He kept saying that my heart is in that building.
Phil finally made it to the lobby of Tower 1. He was just about free of the building, but then...
What's Jet doing? Holy f***.
That's when the second plane hit Tower 2.
All over. Lights went out, 3 cops jumped on top of me. One guy gave me his helmet, and I covered my face, and they just said, remain calm.
They were in darkness, the air thick with smoke and dust.
And the cop said, let's get out of here, and he started feeling his way around. Once we saw that bit of light, I don't think anything would have stopped us. I walked out, it was literally a war zone. There was ashes all over. Right. There was small balls of fire. There was concrete, glass as far as you can see.
Everywhere.
As far as you can see.
Anthony came out a few seconds later. Again, everyone seemed to be safe. But then...
Oh no! Oh no! Maybe 15 seconds after I walked out, that's when the second tower came down.
And I just turned around.
That's exactly what I did.
And you could actually see it come down. They kept telling us, go north, keep going north, don't look back.
That's when I ran, and if I hold my hand in front of my face, I would never be able to see it.
Come to the light!
It was so horrible.
I got 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center, and the first building went down.
News photographer Don Hallisey was covering the disaster for the New York Post.
Of course, everybody's running away from it, and I'm a press photographer, I'm running to it.
Hallisey ran towards the wreckage of Tower 2 and started shooting photos, getting closer and closer to ground zero.
And then we heard like this growing, rumbling, and it sounded like an avalanche.
It was Tower 1 coming down.
There was this blast of warm air. It wasn't hot. It was warm. And it picked me up and threw me up against the wall of the building that was...
You were picked up off the ground.
Physically picked up off the ground. And I'd say like from here to... I was about from here to the end of the partition here.
Yeah.
And I'm screaming, anybody out there? Anybody alive? And my voice was the only voice out there.
How did you get out of this?
Well, I started walking around like in very short steps because I didn't want to trip over anything. And as I said, after about 20 minutes or so, it started to settle and the sun came out. It was like the weirdest thing.
By this time, Phil and Anthony had finally run far enough to be out of harm's way.
And then I finally collapsed, and the EMS was so good. You know, they treated everybody. They just said, sit here. They gave me oxygen.
Kept getting phone calls at my desk, and I got this message, and you keep deleting because you can't, and all you kept praying is, come on, God, let me hear his voice, come on. And then I got, Helen, it's me, the building fell down on me. I'm sorry, don't be mad, I love you, I'm on my way home.
You couldn't see anything.
And my whole department started to cheer.
Look at it now. It's just like, it's like nothing was there. Think how many bodies are still there.
This is a terrible moment. But this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
And photographs are all that remain for many families who still hope that somehow their loved ones survived.
I stood there in horror and cried.
To me, it wasn't really no accident after the second plane.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
And as we tried to process this at 9:41,
there is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon. It would appear that there has been another major explosion.
If you were at a different location, you would be able to see that that plane cut into that building just like an axe into a birthday cake.
and into the soul of our nation. If our hearts were racing, so from the sound of his voice was Bryant Gumbel's.
It would seem that the United States on this day is under attack from terrorists.
An attack and its fallout still playing out.
The top floors collapsed down.
10 a.m., tower number 2 collapses. Then at 10:29,
Wait a second. Is this a live picture? This is a live picture. We are seeing the second World Trade Center Tower number 1 has just collapsed, ladies and gentlemen. Both of us were sure we were dead.
And I looked behind me and saw this cloud, and the cloud had already captured Barry, and it was coming toward me, and I just thought he was gone.
We lost tons of guys.
under tons of rubble, firefighters, police, tri-staters, hundreds, thousands, too early to tell.
The early suspicion is that Osama bin Laden was behind this.
Gunmen appearing to applaud today's terrorism.
we are completely shocked.
We would be further shocked by the saga of yet a 4th plane, United Flight 93, crashing in Pennsylvania. Probably not here, not the capital, because some brave souls aboard her put up the final fight of their lives. And back at what we had begun calling Ground Zero, as if to punctuate the end of this death-dealing day in September,
Building number 7, 47 stories high.
joined the Twin Towers in a seeming slow-mo slump to oblivion. After 4 plane crashes, 2 trade towers, and all those lives, you were thinking,
I felt very afraid for the world.
It's not over. Just let me over.
Video shows bin Laden at dinner in Kandahar, bragging of prior operation a few weeks old. During those few weeks in December, something happens in eastern Afghanistan.
Just humming to myself. It did get very boring in there, and I would sit there and I would start running through, scenarios of what might have happened or whatever. And I could vaguely hear it, not very well, but outside the elevator, I could vaguely hear, sirens. I heard occasional screams. That I could never, make out voices or anything or hear people talking.
Those people who would survive were moving quickly now down to the streets. And strangers encouraged strangers, assisting the wounded, comforting those in shock.
And I think we sort of got through it by just kind of calling out floor by floor. Okay, we're at 66. Okay, we're at 65. Only 63 more to go. 50. See how many we made.
Floor 20. Just remembered it was the 20th floor, and I just said, I can't do this anymore because I was hurting so bad. And I stopped.
Her arms were severely burned. Her face appeared to be burned. She was limping. Both her wrists looked to be broken.
And Kelly just said, come on. He said, we did all these flights. You got 20 more. And I says, okay. And we just did it.
I knew I was growing tired at times. And Eric would tell me, he said, why don't you just sit down? I think I'd sit down, and I go, no, we have to go. Because there was just something inside of me that kept saying, we have to get out of here.
As we were going down the stairs, I remember I had tears in my eyes, and Fred Eichler was putting his arm around me, trying to calm me down, and he's saying, what's wrong? Are you okay?
He really thought, he was never going to, see his baby again. And I know going down the steps, many times I put my arm around him and I said, we're going to make it, we're going to be okay. The people who were going down stayed to the left, and the firemen were on the right side of the stairwell coming up. And that is a very haunting memory, seeing all those firemen going up the staircases, we were going down, knowing that probably they did not survive.
There was a look of both determination and fear in their faces that I'll never forget. I see it every day. I think about it every day.
You know, we definitely wished him Godspeed. But that was like down in the 30s. And they were huffing and puffing in, and I'm like, you're nowhere near where you need to be. He says, be happy you're going down instead of coming up.
Firefighters would finally reach the 78th floor of the South Tower in time to find people trapped and alive, but too late to get them out. On street level, people from some of the highest and most devastated floors were finally out of the building and into the arms of waiting rescue workers.
I remember as people see us coming, I guess because of the way we looked, you know, Donna, you know, bleeding, I have, you know, clothes are shredded and blood and debris all through our hairs and on our feet. They just part like the Red Sea to let us through.
So when I came out of the building, I think I was just collapsing at that point. And I remember Dominic carrying me and telling me it's going to be okay.
And I just said, don't worry about it, you're out now. I've got you. I said, if it hurts, just squeeze me. And she held tighter. And I said, you'll see your family today, don't worry about it, you're out. You're going to see your family, you'll go home, you'll be okay.
I don't even remember who took me. I just remember it being someone uniformed.
Mary Jose was immediately put on a stretcher, but not without saying goodbye to Eric Thompson.
And I remember giving him a hug and telling him, thank you for saving my life.
Hang in there, lady.
Ling Young made it out to the curb, escorted by a fireman from the 51st floor down. All the wounded were quickly loaded into ambulances. Stanley Premnath and Brian Clark stared back at the burning buildings.
And he looked through the trees, and he said, you know, Brian, he said, I think that tower could come down.
And Brian had this look in his eyes. Stan, I told you steel don't bend. I'm an engineer. And we heard this strange sound. It was like steel bending and creaking. It was like a horrible, ghostly sound. And this building started to sway from side to side.
And I didn't finish the sentence, and we watched the tower start to slide down into its own dust.
As the South Tower began to fall, Ron DeFrancesco was just reaching the exit. He is one of the last people to make it out alive.
I looked out to Liberty Street and saw a big fireball coming. That's all I remember.
Ron DeFrancesco was blown across the street. He regained consciousness days later in a hospital. He had a fractured skull and burns over 67% of his body. Inside the North Tower, Fire Chief Rich Picciotto had worked his way up to the 35th floor when the South Tower went down.
All of a sudden, this noise starts. This horrendous, powerful noise. Kind of just freezes everyone in their tracks, and we're just looking up because it's coming from above us. You know, what is that? The building is shaking. We're looking up, we're all just looking at the ceiling, and I'm just waiting for the ceiling to explode. And then the noise kind of just goes through us. And then the noise just blows, and then it stops. Utter silence.
George Slay had just come down all the way from the North Tower's 91st floor.
All the lights went out, and I was blown across the concourse. Just the force of what I imagine a tornado would be. I was able to stay on my feet, and was enveloped in a huge cloud of dust. And I thought my life was over at that point. And again, I just prayed to God to spare me, and in His mercy, He did.
Within the space of 100 minutes, George Schley had survived the crash of a plane just 20 feet over his head, and now the collapse of a skyscraper at his feet. Chris Young was still in his North Tower elevator. He did not know what had just happened, but he had heard it.
First it started just as a rumble, and just I could sort of feel it shaking into the elevator. It made the elevator just increasingly shake and shake and shake. And then it was followed by this gust of wind that started just pressing in just these massive amounts of dust in through the side cracks of the doors. And at that point, I mean, I did just sort of ball up totally on the floor with the shirt around my head because I didn't know what was going on.
When the South Tower collapsed, the fire department ordered the evacuation of all rescue personnel from the North Tower.
I took the bullhorn and I went to all 3 stairwells and yelled up and down. We're evacuating, we're getting out. This is the fire department, we're getting out.
Finally, the power just goes out. There was no particular event that preceded it, but just the power goes out in the elevator. Goes dark for a second, and then emergency lights do come on.
For one last time, Chris Young goes to the elevator doors and tries to pry them apart. And suddenly they open to the lobby of the North Tower.
It was well, I mean, I didn't know what to make of it at the time, but just a very surreal scene with everything of the lobby just completely debris strewn, and just inches of this sort of grayish, pinkish dust was everywhere, all over the place. And there was no one in the lobby. But then outside the building, I saw 2 firefighters, and I just yelled out to them, you know, where do I go? And one of them turned back and looked at me and just sort of motioned me over with his hand. And then I took a look up the tower, and all I could see was, you know, the smoke coming from the upper floors and fire shooting out. And I just let out, oh my God. But the firefighters just sort of jerked me then and said, come on, we gotta go.
Just as Chris Young got out of the building, the North Tower began to collapse. The fire chief, Rich Picciotto, was still on the 6th floor.
All of a sudden, that noise starts again. That horrendous noise from the last time, this noise, now it's intensified 100 times. The building is shaking like crazy now. You just knew it was going to be on you in a matter of seconds, and it was. I tried to run down the stairs and fell down, and tried to get up and fell again, tumbled, and then I had this falling sensation. And then a couple seconds later, deathly silence again. Black, silent black, and I'm covered with dust, debris. But I realized I was alive. So I just called out, is there anyone else here? And I started hearing, yeah, I'm here too. You know, from both above me and below me.
In the rubble of the North Tower, part of one stairwell had remained intact. 14 people, 12 of them firemen, had survived there. But they were trapped, including Captain Jay Jonas, who was on his radio.
I said, Mayday, 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 Ladder 6 to command post, Mayday. And the Deputy Chief Tom Herring answers, says, go ahead, Ladder 6. This is Ladder 6. We are in the North Tower, Tower number 1, in the B stairway, and we're trapped between the 2nd and 4th floor. I get choked up every time I talk about this, but I remember Cliff Stapner in particular getting on the radio